In earthquake prediction, they look at two things, stability and upheaval. And we redefine presidential elections in those terms, not in terms of one candidate versus another, or Republicans versus Democrats, or liberals versus conservatives, but stability. The party holding the White House keeps the White House, and upheaval, the party holding the White House is tossed out of the White House. And we have a theory. Our theory is that the American voter is fundamentally pragmatic, that the voters are not swayed by the debates, the speeches, the ads, the tricks of the campaign. In fact, campaigns don't matter at all. Rather, it's the fundamentals that matter. That is, if the party holding the White House has done a good job governing the country, the voters will give that party 4 more years. If not, they'll turn to the challenging party. And we looked at every election from 1860, back in the horse and buggy days of American politics, Abraham Lincoln versus Stephen Douglas, up to Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan in 1980 in the age of television, polls, and jet planes. Remember, this is 1981. And we came up with a model and a decision rule for carrying out our theory of performance-based voting. And the model is really simple. It's the world's only do-it-yourself prediction system. All of your listeners can buy my book, Predicting the Next President, and predict the next upcoming election on their own. And the model is simple. It's 13 yes, no, or true-false, let's call them true-false questions, about the political environment prior to a presidential election, focusing on the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And if 6 or more of the keys are false, that is turned against the party in power, they get 6 strikes. 6 strikes and they're out. If fewer than 6 of the 13 keys are turned against the party in power, they are predicted to win.
This is fascinating because it excludes the kind of thing that the media is obsessed with. And I want to go back, for example, to Clinton's second tilt at the presidency, where he had the Lewinsky scandal, he had Ken Starr chasing him around like a man possessed, there were impeachment proceedings, but actually the people of America didn't really give a damn about that. It influenced their personal opinion about Clinton, but the factors that determined whether or not they would re-elect him as president transcended that, right?
That's right. Following the day-to-day, and no offense to the media, but media has to write a story every day, but following the day-to-day events of the campaign is like trying to understand the tides of the ocean by looking at the froth on the waves. The keys to the White House tap into the underlying tidal forces that determine presidential elections. As far as conventional punditry, conventional analysis, take all that and do to it what the great British philosopher David Hume said you should do to works of superstition. Consign them to the flames. They're worse than useless.
And in fact, punditry very often gets it wrong. And we have seen a great many examples of that through the primaries, the US primaries, the selection of both the Republican and Democratic candidates. But we stick with it, we persevere with it. Is it simply because punditry is essentially a media creation and it's keeping us all in work?
That's all it is. It's smoke and mirrors. Look, what do the pundits rely on for telling you what's going on in a presidential election? Obviously, the polls. Well, no one has actually voted yet, and no one's going to vote for many, many months. So how do you know if a poll is correct? There's no reality check. So you take another poll, and so on and so on. So the traditional pundits can never be wrong because they can always say, well, I was right at the time the poll was taken, and no one can disprove that, but they can never be right either because there is no reality, no underlying science to what they say, and they keep adjusting their punditry up until the election itself. And, of course, nobody remembers what the pundits said a few months ago. Let me give you a classic example.
Yeah.
In 1988, I made my prediction of a George H.W. victory in May when Bush was 17 points behind Michael Dukakis. And I was derided by the pundits, of course. How can you say that? Of course, once the polls and the elections came around, the pundits came around saying, that brilliant George Bush, he ran that negative campaign against Dukakis. Well, if George Bush had lost, those same pundits would have been saying, that's stupid George Bush. Didn't he know you can't run a negative campaign when you represent the party in power? So whatever happens, it doesn't matter. They have an explanation for it, but the explanation is like smoke in the air. It's meaningless.